slipped and fell. My own sister Antoinette helped him up, and you know what he did? He jumped into her arms and said, "Will you marry me, yes or no?"
Amadeus wasn't just a period drama, it was the madness no one saw coming. Behind the powdered wigs and symphonic brilliance, chaos ruled. Mozart stormed back onto the charts 2 centuries after his death. But buried beneath the envy and applause lies something darker. A villain's music finally heard again, a rivalry that bled into reality, and secrets that turned Hollywood's greatest composers into legends. These are 20 weird facts about Amadeus. Strike the first note. This wasn't harmony, it was a duel disguised as music. They just never told you fact 20. The iconic laugh required whiskey to reproduce. That laugh, shrill, piercing, almost childish. It cuts through every scene like a knife, unsettling audiences just as much as it unsettled the dignified elites of 18th century Vienna. But it wasn't just a wild acting choice. It was rooted in truth. Historical letters described Mozart as having an infectious, giggling laugh, a sound that often made the aristocracy uncomfortable. He was crude, he was loud, and his laughter reflected his refusal to bow to convention. So Tom Hulce created one. He built it from scratch, studying the descriptions, experimenting with pitch and tone until he found something that felt right, high-pitched, unpredictable, and just on the edge of absurd. It was perfect, unsettling and memorable. And at first, he had it down cold. He could summon that laugh on command, take after take, scene after scene. But months later, after dozens of rewrites and re-recordings during post-production, the producers asked him to match the laugh again. Perfectly, exactly as he'd done it before. And Hulce couldn't do it. His voice wouldn't go that high anymore. His body wouldn't respond. The natural instrument he'd trained had somehow lost the ability to reach those notes. So Hulce turned to whiskey. Only after a few strong drinks could he summon that unhinged joy again, loosening his throat and his inhibitions enough to lock it in forever. The iconic laugh that defined Mozart's madness and brilliance, preserved in film history with the help of alcohol and sheer determination, and they shot it inside a country that didn't have freedom. February 19, they filmed a story about freedom under communist surveillance. Milos Forman brought Amadeus home to Czechoslovakia, not for nostalgia, but for authenticity. Prague still looked like 18th century Vienna. No Hollywood set could match it. The cobbled streets, the untouched palaces, the faded grandeur of Habsburg walls that hadn't changed in centuries. It was perfect. But there was a catch. The country was still under communist rule. Every crew member was shadowed. Government minders stood nearby, watching, judging, and taking notes. They reviewed scripts, checked camera movements, questioned equipment choices. At one point, even the choice of music raised eyebrows. Some Czech locals whispered warnings to the crew. Some actors from the region quietly refused roles, afraid of repercussions after the production left. But Forman didn't back down. He'd fled that regime years earlier, escaping to find artistic freedom. Now he returned with cameras, creativity, and a quiet act of defiance. And somehow, through all the restrictions and surveillance, he captured the soul of Mozart in the very streets where emperors once walked, while Big Brother watched from just off frame. Amadeus didn't just recreate history, it filmed it inside its ghost. A story about artistic freedom shot under the gaze of oppression. And then, they nearly burned it all down. Fact 18. They nearly burned down Mozart's historic theater. For one of the grand opera scenes, The crew needed authentic lighting. Electric lights would ruin the period atmosphere. Candles wouldn't provide enough illumination. So they made a dangerous choice. They filled the estate's theater, the actual historic venue where Mozart himself once premiered Don Giovanni, with open flames. Dozens of fire pots, real fire, dancing, flickering, unpredictable fire inside an 18th century wooden building surrounded by silk costumes, velvet drapes, and sweat-soaked wigs. The risk was enormous. One spark, one accident, one moment of carelessness, and they could have destroyed an irreplaceable piece of musical history. Fire safety crews stood by nervously. Insurance companies probably had heart attacks. But Foreman insisted. He wanted authenticity, and nothing else would capture the dangerous beauty of candlelit opera in Mozart's era. They wanted authenticity. They got danger instead. But they also got magic. Scenes that feel genuinely alive, genuinely historic, genuinely Mozart. The theater survived, the film became immortal. And somewhere, Mozart himself might have appreciated the reckless artistic commitment, the willingness to risk everything for one perfect, fiery moment of truth. Most movies fake it. A few quick cuts, maybe a stage close-up, and that's it. But not Amadeus. Fact 17. Every opera was staged as a full-length performance. Milos Forman didn't want illusions. He wanted immersion. He wanted audiences to feel like they were actually sitting in Mozart's Vienna, watching genius unfold in real time. So every opera you see in Amadeus was staged as a full-length performance. Real singers performing complete arias, real orchestras playing the full scores, real audiences responding with genuine reactions. The actors weren't miming to pre-recorded tracks. Foreman filmed these sequences like he was documenting actual opera productions. Multiple cameras captured different angles, but the performances happened in real time, with real energy, real mistakes, real magic. The singers had to maintain their performances through multiple takes, singing the same demanding arias over and over until the shots were perfect. When you watch those opera scenes, you're watching real performances, real artistry. For music professors and opera lovers who watch the film, that commitment shows in every frame. Mozart's genius doesn't just feel alive, it is alive, captured with the same respect and grandeur it deserved 2 centuries ago. Yes, Mozart really was commissioned by a masked figure to write a requiem, but Salieri had nothing to do with it. Fact 16. The requiem commissioner was a fraud, not a killer. The real man who hired Mozart was Count Franz von Walsegg, a wealthy noble with a twisted hobby. He loved commissioning music from brilliant composers and then claiming it as his own. He'd hire genius, pay for genius, then pass it off as his own work at private performances. A musical fraud with enough money to buy talent and enough arrogance to steal credit. Walsegg wanted Mozart's requiem to be performed at his wife's memorial service under his own name, as if he'd composed it. He'd done this before with other works, fooling friends and family into believing he possessed gifts he never had. Mozart, desperate for money and weakened by illness, took the commission without knowing the full truth. While Amadeus turned it into a tale of jealousy and killing, poisoning and revenge, the reality was weirder, less malicious perhaps, but more deeply sad. Mozart wasn't haunted by Salieri's envy. He was ghostwriting for a fraud, his final work destined to be stolen by a man history would have otherwise forgotten. Sometimes the truth isn't as dramatic as fiction, but it's certainly more bizarre. And the person who acted Mozart wasn't hired for his piano skills, but he refused to let a single note feel fake fact. 15. Every piano gesture was historically perfect. Tom Hulce knew the camera would be watching, not just his face, not just his expressions, but his fingers. Every movement, every gesture, every subtle shift of the wrist. If he faked it, audiences would know, musicians would know, and for a film about the greatest composer who ever lived, that was unacceptable. So for months, Hulce drilled the pieces, 6 hours a day, every day, not just playing the notes, but understanding them, learning the physical language of Mozart's music, every flick of the wrist, every key strike, every silent beat between notes. He studied recordings, watched concert pianists, practiced until his fingers moved instinctively. He wasn't actually playing live on set. The music was pre-recorded, but every single movement had to sync perfectly with the soundtrack. The commitment was obsessive, exhausting, but absolutely necessary. And in post-production, when music professors reviewed the footage frame by frame, analyzing every scene where Mozart sat at the keyboard, they found something remarkable. Not a single gesture out of place. Not one. Every finger landed on the correct key. Every hand position matched the chord being played. Every flourish, every dramatic pause, every moment of genius captured on film was musically accurate. Even Mozart himself would have been impressed. Hulce didn't just play Mozart, he embodied the physical poetry of his music, creating a performance so precise that it fooled even the experts. A testament to preparation, discipline, and respect for the genius he was portraying. The deathbed duet, Salieri at Mozart's side, dictated rhythms, whispered genius into the dark. Fact 14. The deathbed duet was rehearsed like surgery. The deathbed duet played like a hallucination, fevered, intimate, almost supernatural, but beneath the dramatic lighting and haunting music, it was rehearsed with mathematical precision. That scene was the emotional heart of the film, the moment where envy transforms into something almost like love, and it had to be perfect. Hulce and Abraham worked for weeks with music advisors, breaking down every second of the sequence. They didn't just practice acting, they practiced music. Which hand moved where? Which note came next? What tempo to follow? Every gesture, every scribble on paper, every whispered instruction had to align with the actual composition of Mozart's Requiem. It wasn't enough to look convincing, it had to be correct. The advisors walked them through each measure, note by note, showing them how Mozart would have worked, how Salieri would have transcribed. They studied the manuscript pages, learned the flow of the composition, understood the architecture of the music itself. When the cameras rolled, Hulce and Abraham weren't just performing drama, they were performing music, physically embodying the creative process down to the bar line. The result is extraordinary. It's not just dramatic, it's accurate. Music professors who watch the film find themselves captivated by that scene, not because it's emotionally powerful, though it is, but because it's musically correct. Fact 13. Salieri's mistress was actually his in real life. In Amadeus, there's a brutal moment that cuts deep. Salieri watches as his prize soprano, Caterina Cavalieri, flirts her way into Mozart's world, his own student, his musical jewel, the voice he cultivated, the talent he nurtured, slipping away to Mozart again. It's not just professional jealousy, it's emasculation. The film shows Salieri losing her affection, her loyalty, even her voice, as she becomes another piece of his life that Mozart effortlessly claims. But here's the twist. In real life, that soprano was almost certainly Salieri's mistress, not Mozart's. Cavalieri was his muse, his collaborator, and according to most historians, his lover. She starred in multiple operas he wrote specifically for her voice. They toured together. They performed together. Their professional and personal bond lasted years, a relationship that defined much of Salieri's creative life. The film flipped that truth on its head, and the reason is devastatingly effective. Showing Salieri lose everything, his pride, his lover, even his voice through her, made his slow collapse impossible to look away from. It transformed a historical inaccuracy into emotional truth, deepening his humiliation and isolation. Every time Cavalieri appears on screen with Mozart, laughing at his jokes and singing his music, we watch Salieri die a little more inside. It's a cruel rewriting of history, turning Salieri's real lover into a cinematic ghost who haunts him by choosing his rival. But dramatically, it works, because Amadeus isn't really about facts. It's about how genius makes everyone around it feel small, invisible, and forgotten. It wasn't just performance, it was personal. Fact 12. Real-life tension mirrored the on-screen rivalry. F. Murray. Abraham didn't just play Salieri, he lived him. On set, the feelings were eerily similar to the story unfolding on camera. Tom Hulce had a lightness, a natural joy that radiated through the production. He bonded quickly with Meg Tilly, who was originally cast as Constanze before her injury. They shared jokes, inside stories, and a youthfulness that made them inseparable. Their energy was infectious, drawing cast and crew into their orbit. Abraham felt it all. The distance, the uninvited space, the quiet ache of being on the outside looking in. Just like Salieri watching Mozart from the shadows of his own bitterness, Abraham observed Hulce's effortless charm with a mixture of admiration and something darker. He later admitted it himself. He felt pushed out, like the odd man on the edge of a friendship he couldn't join. And then something strange happened. That tension, that genuine discomfort, bled directly into the film. Their scenes together crackled with authentic emotion. The envy, the resentment, the heartbreak. None of it had to be faked. Abraham didn't need to pretend Salieri hated Mozart's brilliance. He already felt overshadowed. It's rare when real emotion matches a script so perfectly. But in Amadeus, the rivalry wasn't just written, it was lived. And that's what made it unforgettable. Fact 11. Abraham wasn't even on the casting list. F. Murray. Abraham was a respected stage actor, but in Hollywood, he was still a question mark. Quiet, unfamiliar, unproven, and for a role as enormous as Salieri, that just wouldn't do. Director Milos Forman auditioned everyone. Oscar winners, European legends, even known villains who could deliver icy stares and elegant rage. Big names circled the project, each one bringing credentials and star power. But none of them cracked it. Then Abraham walked in. Late in the casting process, no fanfare, no reputation preceding him. Just a man in his 40s with sunken eyes and a voice that could curdle blood. He didn't read the whole scene. He didn't need to. He just said one line. One devastating, soul-crushing line that would become the heartbeat of the entire film. Mediocrities everywhere, I absolve you. And the room went silent. Forman stared. The decision was instant. From almost being overlooked to owning the role completely. And 1 year later, he stood on the Oscar stage with a golden statue in hand, proving that sometimes the greatest performances come from the actors no one saw coming. No one dared to question it. But he wasn't the only actor picked unexpectedly. Fact 10. The lead actress was cast overnight after a soccer injury. Meg Tilly had already been cast. She was rehearsing, memorizing lines, getting fitted for costumes. She was bonding with Tom Hulce, building the chemistry that would bring Constanza to life. Everything was set. Production was days away from starting. And then came a freak accident. Just days before filming began, Tilly tore a ligament during a casual game of soccer with other cast members. A simple game. A moment of fun between rehearsals. And suddenly, the entire production froze. They couldn't wait for her to heal. They couldn't delay. They needed a new Constanze immediately. Enter Elizabeth Berridge. She was cast almost overnight. No lengthy auditions. No time to test chemistry with Hulce, no grand process. Just a desperate phone call and a leap of faith. She flew to Prague, stepped into costumes that had been made for someone else, and started filming scenes with an actor she barely knew. And somehow, miraculously, it worked. That wide-eyed frustration, the desperate charm, the blend of innocence and fierce loyalty, it all felt natural, as if she'd been there all along. Berridge brought an energy that made Constanze feel real, vulnerable, and utterly devoted to her chaotic genius husband. Behind the camera, though, everyone knew the truth. This wasn't careful casting. This was a miracle pulled from chaos. A last-minute replacement who saved the production and delivered a performance that no one saw coming. Fact 9. Mark Hamill never got to audition. Mark Hamill had spent months proving he was more than Luke Skywalker, and by 1983, he was dazzling theater crowds in Amadeus 8 shows a week. Live, raw, and electric. Night after night, he delivered that manic laugh, that wild energy, that genius barely contained. So when the film adaptation was announced, Hamill thought he had a real shot. He knew the part inside and out. He had the timing, the energy, the physicality. He was Mozart, proven on one of the most demanding stages in the world. Broadway audiences adored him. Critics praised him. He'd done the work. But Hollywood wasn't ready to let go of the galaxy. Director Milos Forman never even brought him in to audition. To Forman, Hamill was still space royalty, the boyish rebel with a droid and a destiny, not the chaotic, giggling genius of 18th century Vienna. It didn't matter that Hamill had transformed himself on stage. The lightsaber was too bright, the shadow of Skywalker too long. And just like that, he was out. The part went to Tom Hulce, and Hamill quietly returned to the stage, watching the film version from a seat in the audience instead of from inside the powdered wig. He didn't lose because he wasn't good enough. He lost because Hollywood couldn't see past the stars, and Stage Kid would fly from New York. Fact 8. Cynthia Nixon flew between continents for single scenes. When Cynthia Nixon was cast as Salieri's maid in Amadeus, it wasn't just a breakout moment, it came with impossible conditions. Because Nixon had another acting job at the same time, back in New York, and she couldn't abandon it. So she struck a rare deal with Milos Forman. She'd fly to Europe, shoot her scenes one day at a time, and fly back immediately. No long stays, no waiting around on set. Just precision scheduling and constant motion. One day in Prague, wearing period costumes and powdered wigs. The next day, back in New York, on a completely different stage. And it worked. Her scenes were shot in surgical bursts, carefully planned around her transatlantic schedule. She'd land, go straight to hair and makeup, film her moments with Abraham, and head back to the airport. No time for sightseeing. No time to bond with the cast. Just work, travel, repeat. Fact 7. The costumes were torture. The wigs looked majestic, the corsets flawless, the ballrooms breathtaking. On screen, Amadeus drips with elegance, powdered perfection, silk and velvet. The opulence of imperial Vienna brought to life. But behind that beauty was misery. Layers upon layers of heavy fabric, tight corsets squeezing ribs, sweat pooling under lace in stifling heat, breathless extras locked in place under chandeliers and candlelight. Some fainted, some threw up, some just gave up entirely, unable to endure another take in costumes that weighed them down like armor. The heat was unbearable, especially during the grand opera and ballroom scenes where dozens of actors stood packed together under hot lights. One actor later joked, "It was like filming inside an oven while wearing a wedding cake." There was no comfort, no shortcuts, no modern fabrics or hidden cooling systems. Everything was authentic, which meant everything was brutal. The wigs were heavy and itchy. The makeup ran in the heat. The shoes pinched. Every moment of elegance came at a physical cost that the audience would never see. And yet, the effect worked. The opulence on screen wasn't CGI or filters or movie magic. It was pain, exhaustion, and suffering sewn right into every ruffle. The grandeur felt real because it was real. Built on the backs of actors who endured authentic 18th century misery to bring Mozart's world to life, elegance earned through agony. Fact 6. Abraham became Salieri and never broke character. It wasn't just a performance, it was a possession. Once Abraham landed the role of Salieri, he didn't just memorize lines. He stepped into the soul of a man devoured by envy, and he didn't come back out. On set, he wasn't warm. He wasn't casual. He moved like a ghost, carrying centuries of regret. Locked in that black robe and powdered wig, as if they were a second skin. Technicians whispered that he barely smiled between takes. One crew member swore he never saw Abraham break character, even at lunch. He would sit alone, silent, still wrapped in Salieri's melancholy. The transformation was so complete that even casual conversation felt like an intrusion. And the way he looked at Tom Hulce, it wasn't acting. Behind that intense stare was real, simmering resentment. Not hatred, but something colder, like Salieri's contempt had bled into Abraham's bones and refused to leave. The transformation was so complete, so quietly unsettling, that even director Milos Forman grew cautious about when and how to speak to him. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't showy. It was uncomfortably real, the kind of commitment that blurs the line between performance and reality, and that unrelenting focus paid off in every frame. Because every time the camera rolled, Abraham didn't just play Salieri, he became him. And for those few months in Prague, no one on set dared to tell the difference. The genius, the pain, the fury, it was all there, lurking just beneath the surface. But many of the events in the movie never really happened. Fact 5. The killing plot never happened. The death, the mass commission, the slow poisoning, the deathbed confession, none of it happened in real life. Antonio Salieri didn't kill Mozart, and he probably didn't even hate him. In fact, historical records suggest he respected him deeply. He praised Mozart's talent publicly. He taught one of Mozart's sons. They weren't bitter enemies locked in a deadly rivalry. They were colleagues navigating the same competitive world of 18th century Vienna. The rivalry that drives Amadeus was pure invention. dramatic license taken from centuries-old gossip, rumors that started circulating after Mozart's death and were stretched into legend over time. People wanted a villain. They needed someone to blame for the tragic loss of genius. Salieri, successful and still alive, became the convenient scapegoat. The irony is cruel. Salieri was a successful composer in his own right, respected across Europe, teacher to Beethoven and Schubert. But Amadeus rewrote his legacy entirely. Now, when people hear his name, they don't think of his operas or his contributions to music. They think of poison, envy, and betrayal. A reputation destroyed by fiction, cemented by 8 Oscars and unforgettable performances. History lost. Drama won. But the drama did some good. Fact 4. Amadeus made Mozart a pop star. 200 years after his death, Mozart died broke, dismissed, buried in a mass grave. Many considered him a vulgar, arrogant nuisance, but 2 centuries later, Amadeus made him a superstar. When the film hit theaters in 1984, no one expected what followed. Not just awards, not just acclaim. A full-on Mozart revival. Classical radio stations started getting flooded with requests. Record stores couldn't keep up, especially in the US, where symphonies had long played second fiddle to pop and rock Mozart albums, soared onto mainstream charts. And not just a few. In 1985, the year after the film, Mozart outsold Bruce Springsteen and Madonna on Billboard's classical lists. Suddenly, Eine kleine Nachtmusik was being played in malls. Symphony No. 25 turned up in commercials. Teenagers who'd never touched a harpsichord were humming concertos. It was the rare moment when art didn't just imitate life. It rewrote it. The man they called a failure now had the best-selling album in America 200 years too late, but finally heard. Concert halls filled with new audiences. Music teachers reported surging interest. Mozart became cool again, not despite his centuries-old music, but because a film reminded the world what genius actually sounds like. Fact 3. The marketing campaign sold classical music like rock and roll. No studio wanted Amadeus at first, a period drama about classical composers. Who would watch that? So Orion Pictures took a risk and sold it like a rock concert. They didn't make traditional trailers with dialogue and plot. They cut a music video using Mozart's Symphony No. 25. They spliced in rapid-fire shots from the film, but not just period drama footage. They added Kiss, Madonna, Michael Jackson, even live concert crowds, head-banging. The editing was frenetic, electric, rebellious. The message was crystal clear. This wasn't your grandfather's Mozart. This was classical music cranked to 11. It wasn't a trailer, it was a vibe. And it worked. The campaign positioned Amadeus not as stuffy historical drama, but as dangerous, sexy, revolutionary Mozart became a rock star in powdered wigs. The music was presented as what it actually was in his time: shocking, provocative, boundary-pushing. Young audiences responded. They showed up expecting energy and rebellion, and the film delivered. The marketing gamble paid off spectacularly, proving that classical music could compete with contemporary pop culture, if presented with the right attitude. Sometimes the best way to honor tradition is to make it feel dangerous again. Fact 2. It opened on only 25 screens and became a phenomenon. There was no fanfare, no massive rollout, just 25 screens quietly showing a period drama about powdered wigs and poisoned envy. Nobody expected Amadeus to hit. It didn't have bankable stars. It didn't have explosions. It didn't even have a traditional hero, just a jealous mediocrity confessing to a priest. But the whispers started. Critics couldn't stop talking. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. From art houses to multiplexes, from students to scholars. Within weeks, it wasn't just playing, it was selling out. The limited release became a nationwide phenomenon. By the end of its run, Amadeus had grossed over $90 million worldwide, 3 times its budget. But the real crescendo came at the 1985 Oscars. 8 wins. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, but not for Mozart. For Salieri, the man left behind. And maybe that's what hit audiences hardest. This wasn't just a film about genius. It was about the pain of being almost one. About watching brilliance from the shadows. About recognition coming to the wrong person, or not at all. It opened small, but it cracked something wide open, and decades later, it still hasn't closed. A quiet film about old music that somehow became unforgettable. Fact 1. The director's cut added a dark seduction scene. The theatrical version ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. Epic, exhausting, exhilarating. But that wasn't the full vision. Director Milos Forman originally cut over 20 minutes, not because they didn't matter, but because he feared audiences wouldn't sit through it. Test screenings suggested people were getting restless, so scenes were trimmed, moments lost. Years later, when the director's cut was released, it added back sequences that changed everything. One moment showed Costanza, desperate and broken, trying to seduce Salieri to secure Mozart's future. She arrives at his home with Mozart's compositions, offering them, and herself, in exchange for his patronage. The scene is uncomfortable, raw, heartbreaking. Critics were divided. Some called it too dark, too raw, unnecessary. But for fans, it offered something rare. A second look at desperation, at how far love pushes people, at the moral compromises hiding beneath the powdered elegance. The extended cut doesn't just add runtime, it adds context, depth, complexity. It shows Constanze not as a cheerful wife, but as a woman fighting for her husband's survival in the only ways available to her. It makes Salieri's rejection more devastating, more human. For those willing to sit longer, the director's cut reveals what Forman always intended. A darker, more complete portrait of genius, obsession, and betrayal. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.